Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this important discussion supporting displaced Ukrainians, refugees issues and perspectives. I'm Sid Matthews, acting as chair for this evening, myself a Green Party member, trade unionists in Unite, and activist for Unite's affiliate, the trade union-sponsored Ukraine Solidarity campaign. This summer just gone, I worked with fellow Greens to draft a solidarity motion on Ukraine for autumn conference. Though submitted as a late motion and not debated in plenary, conversations, campaign materials and social media helped build momentum, and from that interest grew tonight's expanded host group, green.ukraine.solidarity. This evening, we meet at a time when still more Ukrainians are forced to leave their country, which is still under escalating Russian bombardment after 3.5 years of war, while also now confronting the hostile environment for refugees instigated by the far right in the UK and, arguably, indulged by the media and the present administration and government with its recent statement and accompanying consultation on earned settlement. Tonight, we're joined by 5 panellists who bring unique perspectives on this challenge. Firstly, Professor Sarah Jones, lead for the project Support for Displaced Ukrainians at the University of Birmingham. She'll set out key findings from her team's new report, Displaced Ukrainians in UK, Experiences and Future Intentions, and what they mean for policy and practice. Dr. Natalia Kogut, Associate Researcher for the project Support for Displaced Ukrainians at the University of Birmingham, building on Sarah's testimony, Natalia Kogut, herself Ukrainian, will add lived context and deeper insights into the report's findings, especially around rights, integration and future intention. Natalia Zinets, a proactive events organiser, intermediary and facilitator between University of Cambridge and Ukrainian government and educational institutions, mentor to young Ukrainians leaving the care system in UK, and senior programme management professional, herself with a young family, will give an account both reflecting on the evidence presented by the researchers and also a narrative based on her own experience. Yulia Bond, a displaced Ukrainian with family, vigorous and articulate campaigner, a vocal advocate for the Nation of Sanctuary programme in Wales, defending it against misinformation and political attacks, passionately argues that the scheme provides essential integration support for Ukrainian refugees. Last but not least, Elise Benjamin, veteran Green and former long-serving Green councillor, likely the first Lord Mayor of Oxford of Ukrainian origin, a decades-long human rights campaigner and veteran of party policy making, and formerly the party international coordinator, is currently an officer on the International Committee. Together, these 5 will help us explore what solidarity means in practice, how displaced people's voices can be amplified in debates around immigration and tolerance, and how war-impelled movements of people across borders can be treated with dignity, respect and compassion. After their opening remarks, I'll invite them into the conversation with some questions, and then we'll open the floor for the contributions of the audience. Please be aware that to allow a range of voices and in full fairness to the audience and panellists as a whole, time to ask each question will be limited to a maximum of 2 minutes. We ask that attendees respect the spirit of the meeting rather than oblige us to enforce this. It may be advisable to make notes and make a note of the question you want to ask rather than make it up on the fly, speaking off the cuff. So, without further ado, let's begin with the evidence. Professor Sarah Jones will ground us in the latest findings. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you. I'm now going to attempt to replicate the screen share that we did so elegantly earlier. Okay, has that worked?
Yep. Yes,
great. Okay, thank you. Thanks very much for the invitation. Really pleased to be here and able to talk about our new report, Displaced Ukrainians in the UK, which was written by myself, Natalia Kogut, who's also here, and Irina Kuznetsova, all at the University of Birmingham. So I'm going to run through some of the key findings, as Seb said, particularly thinking about how these relate to Ukrainians specifically as a group, but also the idea of earned settlement that's out for consultation by the government. Okay, so just to start then with an overview of the survey itself that our report is based on. So this is based building on the impact of an interim survey report that we delivered in March, which we were pleased to say already had some significant policy impact, which we can talk about more in the questions. This was a larger scale survey, and we had almost 3,000 respondents. It was disseminated via social media, so it was an opt-in survey, but that said, the demographics of those responding was more or less representative of the displaced population of Ukrainians in the UK, so it was also UK-wide. And we asked people a range of questions relating to their migration journey to the UK, the kind of visas they were on, their integration, and also, importantly, their future intentions. So just to run over the situation that we're in at the moment, in case people aren't completely familiar with where Ukrainians stand in the current visa regime. So as most of you probably know, the Ukraine was a particular designated route, the Ukraine scheme visas, which was the Ukraine sponsorship scheme, commonly known as Homes for Ukraine, Ukraine Family Scheme, and Ukraine Extension Scheme. These were specially designated routes with visas initially valid for 3 years, which gave people the right to live and work and claim benefits in the UK. In February 2025, the government opened the Ukraine Permission Extension, confusingly not the same thing as the Ukraine Extension Scheme. The Ukraine Permission Extension allowed everyone on the Ukraine scheme visas who were still in the UK to apply for a further 18 months of permission to stay. And then in September 2025, the government announced that that would then be extended by a further 24 months. However, the Ukraine schemes don't include a designated pathway to settlement, as most humanitarian schemes do. And it also, in November 2024, the government made the announcement that the Ukraine schemes were also excluded from the long route to permanent residence. So at the moment, there's no pathway for those on the Ukraine schemes to settle in the UK. It's unclear at the moment whether Ukraine schemes as a humanitarian route fit into the proposed changes to settlement and also the idea of earned settlement. So it's unclear in the government proposals. The Ukraine schemes are a unique route, as I've said, comparable but not identical to the Hong Kong scheme. And that scheme does currently have a 5-year route to permanent residency. However, what I think is important is that the temporary nature of the Ukraine scheme visas can give us an indication of what the impact of a permanent state of precarity and kind of constantly renewed short-term visas might be, something that is very relevant at a moment when the government is proposing that kind of precarity as sort of the standard. Okay, so before I get into thinking about the impact of that precarity, I did just want to have just pause to take a moment about the impact of war on this group. So 28% of our respondents have lost a close family member in the war. 8% have experienced prior displacement, that is since 2014, and mostly relating to being internally displaced. And 38% state that their property is damaged, destroyed, or occupied. So then turning to where Ukrainians are at the moment in the UK, this is just one slide with a brief overview of what kind of visas displaced Ukrainians or Ukrainians displaced since 2022 are on. You can see that the vast majority, so 98%, are on those Ukraine scheme visas or UPE. So for those 227,000 Ukrainians in the UK, what happens to these visas is kind of the most crucial question. So I'm going to think now about a few things relating to integration and how those also relate to things like earned settlement. So I'm going to talk about housing, employment, and education. So thinking about housing, Ukrainians are moving towards independence, so away from the living with their sponsors. As you see, only 10% actually live with their original hosts, 4% with a new host. The majority now do live in the private rented sector. However, the short-term visa status has made it difficult. So when we asked what the impact of the short-term visa status was, Of those for whom it was relevant, 32% state that their visa status was a partial, most likely, or exact reason that a landlord or real estate agent did not renew their lease. And 23% cite it as a reason they were unable to sign a new lease. And I think those quotations on the screen there give you a real sense of the mental health impacts of that pressure on housing. It's also very likely to exacerbate the risk of homelessness amongst this group, which the British Red Cross have shown is already twice as high as for the rest of the population. Thinking about employment, as you can see from these graphs, most Ukrainians are working, with 56% employed or self-employed over 30 hours a week, and a further percentage employed part-time. So it's roughly 3/4 in total are economically active. We also asked about salary, weekly earnings, and the median weekly salary was £462, which we'd note is considerably below the £802 a week needed to transfer to a skilled worker visa. So even by that requirement, the skilled worker visa is out of reach for most displaced Ukrainians. Now, that's not because Ukrainians are not highly skilled. Many are. In fact, this is a particularly highly qualified group for reasons that we could discuss, but because they experience widespread downskilling. So 67% state that they work below their skill level, a phenomenon which is actually noted in previous research on migrants from Europe's East, and which can be attributed in part to stereotyping and a complex form of racialization of these groups known as Eastern Europeanism. So you can sort of think about the stereotype of the Polish plumber or the Romanian cleaner. You can also see from the slide that we're missing out on skills in key shortage sectors, such as in social care and agriculture, healthcare. And again, the short-term visa status puts this economic integration at risk. Of those for whom the question was relevant, 40% state that their visa status was a partial, most likely or exact reason that they were not offered a job for which they'd applied, and 22% that an existing employment contract was terminated or not renewed because of their visa status. Others report that they were not offered long-term career advancement or training opportunities because employers were not sure it was worth investing in someone whose visa was about to run out. So I think this is important because when we're thinking about earned settlement, contribution-based settlement, we can see that precarious visa status can actually impact the ability of migrants to make the very kinds of contribution that the government envisages. And then coming on to education, adults, young adults and children are also missing out on education and training as a result of their short-term visa status, leaving them unable to progress in their careers or with their studies. So 19% of our respondents for whom it's relevant state that they were refused a student loan, for example, due to short-term visa status. And also parents, as you can see from some of the quotations here, were deeply concerned about the impact on their children now who've been in the UK for 4 years on being forced to return to Ukraine, with a majority, so 76%, believing it will be very difficult for their children to reintegrate or indeed integrate if they've only been into school in the UK. So all of these things we can see as having a significant impact on health and well-being of our participants. And that's also seen in the free text comments relating to housing and employment in particular. And this is compounding the mental health problems of a group many of whom are already traumatized by their experiences of war and forced displacement. And for many, the thought of being forcibly displaced again, this time from the lives they've built in the UK, causes anxiety and depression. So finally, I just want to reflect for a moment on how people perceive the idea of return to Ukraine. So you can see some of the statistics here. If the Ukraine permission is not extended, only a very small minority, so 3%, would return to Ukraine. This is simply not a viable option for most people. And worryingly, given the government's current approach, 20% would apply for humanitarian protection or refugee status, and 4% admit that they would stay without a valid visa, which would mean no legal access to work and no recourse to public funds. While many state that the reason is that the UK is their home, so that's 54%, and they see opportunities here, that's 58%, the overwhelming factor is safety. So when they were asked about return at the end of the war, only 5%, so slightly more than 3, but not much, state that they would go back to Ukraine. 72% state that they want to stay in the UK, and 22% are undecided. And the principal reason is safety. So 82% do not believe that Ukraine will be safe even at the end of the conflict. And their concerns are ones that stretch out decades into the future. So the threat of renewed invasion, mines and weapons, a traumatized population, destroyed housing stock and schools, and polarized communities. So I think this shows that it's unrealistic to expect refugees to be able to immediately return once the gunfire stops. On the other hand, long-term security and stability in the host country allows them to build economic and social capital, gain skills, qualifications, and networks that they can then use to support the reconstruction of their home country as an engaged diaspora. So all that leads to then the recommendations in our report, which I'll leave on the screen there, but just very quickly run through. So it's about ensuring that UPE extension is not bureaucratic, that it's an easy procedure, ideally automatic, returning the Ukraine scheme visas to the qualifying period for the 10-year-long route to permanent residency, which in some ways has been superseded by discussions around that route at all. Creating a designated 5-year pathway to residency for displaced Ukrainians, ensuring they have continued access to Ukrainian culture and language, for example, through Ukrainian GCSE, working to ensure the qualifications, skills and experience of displaced Ukrainians are fully recognised, and improving access to dedicated mental health support for displaced Ukrainians, ideally in Ukrainian.
You can leave it, probably.
I'll stop. Oh, thank you. Just I can see you speak, but thank you. That's it. I'll hand over to Natalia.
Okay, second again. So I'm the part of support for displaced Ukrainians team in the University of Birmingham. Prior to this, I used to be an associate professor at the National Technical University of Ukraine. I will mostly share my private experience. I have never planned to migrate abroad, as my life was very settled in Ukraine. I had an apartment in Kyiv, I owned a small legal company, and at the same time, I had my career in academia. Most people never believed in the full-scale invasion. It seemed absolutely impossible that the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, would be attacked, as there is no way for Russians to keep it, either to erase it to the ground or just to attack without prospects to keep it. Putin didn't want to erase it, as it is a historical center of the Kievan Rus, having much longer and rich history than Moscow, and to keep city requires cooperation. So Putin was misinformed. The majority of Ukrainians want Russia in power, and the war would finish in a matter of 3 days. Well, now it's more than 3 years. So I woke up at 5 in the morning from the sound of missile attacks, and many people thought that civilians won't be touched, just military objects. I knew it won't be the case, as I will never forget about my granddad, who witnessed drowning thousands of Ukrainian teenagers in Western Ukraine for being ethnic Ukrainians and speaking Ukrainian language in the USSR times. Now, in 2022, my friend from Bucha was cruelly tortured, raped, and eventually killed by Russians. I have 2 children, and it took us 3 days to get out of Kyiv to the border with Romania. People were shot on the streets, and it was hard to navigate small village roads to escape Russian tanks. There was no question of choice for me, but I knew I'm going to go to the UK due to multiple reasons. I spoke English already, I studied in the UK before, and I have relatives here. Despite having relatives living in the UK, they couldn't accommodate us, as they hosted their closer relatives. So we found a host, but as we were a family of 4 people, our host didn't feel the thank you payment will cover her bills. So we found ourselves in the homeless shelter where we had been staying for 9 months. I started to work in the University of Birmingham in September 22, but managed to secure a private tenancy only in the end of March 23. It's a year contract that requires renewal each year, and I very much struggled to extend it in February this year, as my visa was about to end in March. Despite all the challenges, I'm thankful to both our host and homeless shelter for not being homeless. In Ukraine, there is almost absent homeless shelters and no housing benefits at all. My daughter is due to enter college, but our visa ends in the middle of September 26. Colleges don't want to admit her solely due to her visa status. But the real punch was retroactive excluding of Ukrainian schemes even from 10-year route to residency. Ukrainians became the only nationals that are specifically excluded from any path to settlement. I clearly understand that it has happened due to wishes of Ukrainian government, its people to return to rebuild the country. But unfortunately, people's human rights are completely discounted. People can't live temporary lives for years. With all visa extensions will count 6.5 years. People put enormous efforts to get integrated in a new country and shouldn't be forced to leave, starting to build their lives all over again and again. This is just contrary to humanitarian protection principles. Apart from that, no one gives any guarantees that after peace deal, Russia won't attack again. First, annexation of Crimea that was silently accepted by the international society, then attacks on Donetsk and Lugansk, and then full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Peace deal limits military personnel and doesn't let Ukraine to enter NATO. That is a clear indication of the possibility of the next invasion. Essentially, people who put their lives for independence of Ukraine will be betrayed by this peace deal. I will read a quote from our survey from Free Text. If Ukraine becomes completely owned by Russia and the world agrees to such an end of war, I will have to destroy my Ukrainian identity to return home, because everything Ukrainian will be banned, language, culture, etc. And here's another quote. Russia will attack again to make Ukraine its colony again, to use Ukrainians as a resource and slaves for future wars with other countries and to become an empire. The same happened with Ichkeria. Russia temporarily stopped the war, prepared, attacked again, having finally captured it. It is much more than protecting Ukrainian identity and state. People don't want to be part of Russia because of the absence of democracy and freedoms there, poverty in Russia, and absolutely total autocracy. So displaced Ukrainians are trying to survive in especially now hostile towards migrants environment, with short-term status that impacts ability to find and keep jobs, tenancies, take loans and mortgages, access higher education, whilst trying to support relatives and friends back in Ukraine by sending them remittances and trying to cope with the stress of being in limbo, building lives in the UK, where they are allowed to stay only temporarily and being disconnected already with Ukraine with lost careers, lost housing, broke marriages, and annexed whole cities where people used to live. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Well, if we're ready and if people can see me, my camera's gone. It is, in fact, time to move to our next speaker, and I will introduce her. So, turning insights into his support, Natalia Zinets, could you share your initial reactions to what you've heard and share practical pathways on the ground from community and to institutions? Is that okay?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much, Sarah and Natalia. I'm not sure I can add more after Natalia's speech, but I'll try. I'll share a bit different experience I have in the UK. Let me just share my screen. You see my slides?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so my personal journey, right? Let's start from here. I don't know the better picture to show the journey each immigrant is going through. It's by Bruno Catalano. He is native of Morocco, who immigrated to France. And you can see those sculptures around the world, and it is called Travelers, but actually him being migrant himself was kind of showing this through his artwork. So this is where my personal journey started here in the UK. I arrived in April 2022 with two my kids. And well, as the previous speakers were saying, right, this wasn't our choice. to migrate and move to UK in such circumstances as war in our native country. We all had our good lives plans back in Ukraine, and we were forced to leave the country. I'll try to, to squeeze my experience into this couple of minutes. It was 3 years already, even more, since we've arrived here, and it was each year it was a year of transformation. So my 2 kids now settled at school. Youngest is in primary school, and my teen is in secondary school. My youngest switched to English. He can understand Ukrainian, but talking and speaking in English mostly. So I can echo what was Natalia also saying, and Sarah from the report, that it's very difficult to reintegrate back in Ukraine when he missed already 3 years of education of school in Ukraine. If we talk about I'm not sure I can move to the next slide for some reason. In terms of professional integration, right? I have 16 years of experience in project management back in Ukraine. And so when we arrived here for a couple of months to wait until the war is over, and then I realized it's not going to end that soon, I decided to apply for a proper job here in the UK. And it took me 2 weeks to find a job. I'm a project manager, and all I can do is project management. So we are based in Cambridge, and of course, Cambridge University is the best employer, I guess, from my experience working there for 3.5 years already. So I applied for quite junior position. It was junior project manager just because there were no other more senior roles open at that point in time. And I've got the job, as I said, in 2 weeks. So I can, comment on other experiences when I know that a lot of Ukrainians are struggling to find the job relevant to their experience and to their CV and their skills. So this is what I cannot comment from my side. Also, after 3 years working in Cambridge, I have already gained some confidence and feel like I can contribute more. So I've started my mentorship journey. I'm now mentoring in Goal 17. It's a nationwide organization who is helping young caregivers. So I have a mentee from Ukraine. He's 21, and helping him to to navigate how to find a job and in terms of networking as well. And also I am a mentor in my organization as well. I have a junior project manager who I'm supporting and mentoring. So it all comes together after these 3 years of full-time working and hard working and being a single mom as well with 2 kids. So it's not an easy journey, but by my example, my experience, you can see that this is still possible. Also, I'm on apprenticeship, so I've joined the level 5 leadership and management apprenticeship this year. And I will talk about challenges. So I'm on a skilled worker visa, so I'm part of that 0.6%, right, from the audience. I've switched to this visa last year. So luckily my employer is having that license, and I was eligible to switch to this visa. And for me, this decision was very obvious if you compare, pros and cons of each visa. So I've lost benefits, for instance, right? But they were minor, some discounts for council tax. But on the other hand, have this more predictable future was one of the key factors for me and for my kids when I've decided that I'll go for that skilled worker visa route, and which leads to permanent settlement in 5 years' time and to indefinite leave to remain. But if we talk about the challenges, regardless of what kind of visa you are in, right, there are pros and cons. So for skilled worker visa, I'm kind of hooked now, right, with my employer to work for that number of years, which is stated in my certificate of sponsorship. Also myself, I faced some problems with promotion because my current role is linked to occupation code, which is also stated in certificate of sponsorship. And if I want to progress in my career, I need to reapply for the visa all over again, pay all the fees up front again. And it's not only me, it's my 2 kids, my 2 dependents as well. Well, cost-wise, each year government is reviewing the costs for skilled worker visa, and all the fees are rising again and again. So it's not that it's quite significant amount of money to pay upfront. Bear in mind, it's just not just me, but for my 2 kids as well. Also in documents, you need to collect a number of documents, you need to do the English language test. Just looking at my notes. So promotion I've mentioned as well. So access to learning. So I was eligible for level 6 apprenticeship rather than level 5, but because my visa was about to end in 18 months, rather than 24, just because of this formal criteria, I couldn't go for next level of apprenticeship just because my visa was shorter than the period of apprenticeship. So this is also limiting how you can progress and excel in your career as well. But there are benefits, of course, being on this visa, obviously, right? So this is like a more predictable future and future settlement. So if there are displaced Ukrainians here, and if you are waiting for the sign, so this is the sign, right, to take the ownership of your life and make that hard decision and hard choice, and plan your future. So this is professional integration. If you talk about the Ukrainian community in Cambridge, last week there was a new report published on 25th of November saying that there was 1,000 of Ukrainians fleeing the war, and South Cambridgeshire welcomed those 1,000. And just echoing what Sarah, what was in your report, around 50% of Ukrainians have a private property, rent private properties, and the rest are living with hosting families. So it's more or less the same percentages as in your report. It's available online, so for those who are interested, you can have a look at that report. We have quite a good community here. We have a lot of events. We have a Ukrainian school on Saturdays as well. My kids are sometimes attending that school. So in terms of community and support from the council, I do appreciate we have a lot of support from what I'm hearing, not just my experience, but from my friends as well. I was already saying a few words about the challenges, and I've decided to put this picture on this slide. For us Ukrainians, I guess we are in this uncomfortable zone for years. It's not only full-scale invasion, right? 3 years. The war started way before from Crimea. And I'm not sure that there will be any time anywhere soon when we will be back to that comfort zone. So what we see from all the peace talks, Natalia also mentioned that I guess we will be stuck in this stress zone or comfortable zone for regardless of where we are in the world and where we live. This is also nice. Another angle, looking to Ukrainians from another perspective. I guess a couple of days ago, this was published by Czech Republic Prime Minister saying that thanks to Ukrainian refugees, the Czech Republic received more than it spent on aid to Ukraine. So you can also find this information online. So I guess this is where UK government should also look at, right? How much we contribute, and just Sarah, from the report you were sharing as well, how many Ukrainians are employed, and how many of those are universal credits. So you can add that data to make an informed decision in future for Ukrainians to have a more, clear way for the settlement. Right, and this is like more motivational final slide from my side, right? There is a will, there is a way. From my experience, I would recommend if anyone here are displaced Ukrainians, right, to take the ownership of your life and go for it, regardless of where you are, or what scheme or visa you are in. And I wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you. In that case, I want to thank you so much for your testimony, and I will move on to Julia Bond. Julia, would you like to share your impressions of the research, your points in common with Dalia's experience, and also your own of countering disinformation and of campaigning for the right to integrate, right to work, right to remain, and so on and so forth, particularly in Caerphilly, which had a recent election in which there's a lot of disinformation to counter?
I just want to say that this report is very vital for, I think, not just for the UK government to make informed decision, or for Welsh government to understand how much actually Ukrainians contribute, but I think for the whole. Can you hear me well? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, but actually to fight for right narratives, which is a major issue now, and these narratives, they're actually forming what is happening on political scale. So yeah, talking about me, I came from Ukraine just as like two previous speakers in 2022. And back in Ukraine, I lived just 6 kilometers away from Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. I did lots of engagement politically, and I used to be a head of regional environmental political party as well. So when I came here in 2022, my work was focusing on supporting displaced Ukrainians. And I'm going to speak today more about Wales and what happened recently in Caerphilly during the Caerphilly by-election, and about far-right narratives and how they affect communities and how they affect Ukrainians, and what should be done before the next Senate election, which will have in Wales in May 2026. Yeah, so Caerphilly was in Caerphilly County recently in Wales. We had election because only one election in Wales, because we had a member of the Senate who sadly passed away, and that's why election happened only in Caerphilly County. So imagine Reform UK, who threw all their resources into small county with 170,000 residents only. There's lots of disinformation and lots of narratives which targeted displaced communities, including Ukrainians. Yeah, so we saw how far-right narratives can spread faster than the truth. We saw misleading leaflets, twisted facts, targeted messages filling people's homes. We saw claims repeated with confidence that had no factual basis. One of the most damaging examples was the way the Nation of Sanctuary program was misrepresented. People were told that it was about asylum seekers taking resources, but the reality over 91% of that findings was used to support displaced Ukrainians, traumatized families, children fleeing bombardment, people trying to rebuild their lives here in Wales. But public never heard that truth, and because nobody filled the information gap, the far right filled it for them. So the impact of that goes beyond politics. It creates fears, it creates anger, it created division in a community that had previously been welcoming, compassionate, and open. It made displaced people feel unsafe in a place they thought would be their refuge. And when people tried to report the misinformation, our Ukrainian community, particularly in Caerphilly, fought a lot against misinformation about the nation of sanctuary scheme. So when, but there was no mechanism to stop it, and so they passed these leaflets, misinformation about the nation of sanctuary scheme, about the funding, about the purpose of the scheme. They were passed to every single home in Caerphilly County, and we contacted the Electoral Commission, we contacted the returning officer, and we contacted police. But there was no clear responsibility, no rapid response, and no protection for vulnerable communities. And that's just not just bureaucratic failure, it's a democratic vulnerability. And it left ordinary people, such as displaced communities, to fight organized misinformation alone. And I wrote publicly about what happened. I was invited to provide evidence to the Member Accountability and Election Bill Committee in the Senate. The team drafting new legislation to strengthen honesty in Welsh politics and protect elections from misinformation. I have already submitted the input to the committee, and I told them exactly what our community saw, how fast misinformation spread in Caerphilly, how unregulated print leaflets bypass all digital standards, how the far right exploited uncertainty about housing, how displaced communities became targets in this political battle, how fragmented and slow the reporting system is, how no single authority takes ownership for this. And most importantly, I spoke about the impact, and that it's not just a disinformation, but it's a real safeguarding issue. So they listened, and that is encouraging. But legislation alone will not be enough, and we need now a whole Wales and maybe whole UK response. And that's why today I'm also put proposal to the Senate that I believe is essential if we want to prevent what happened in Caerphilly from happening again anywhere else in Wales. So my proposal is for Wales to organize a national disinformation summit. So I will read now a bit about my proposal. So this could be a coordinated all Wales event, bringing together politicians, media and journalism organizations, academics, researchers, counselors, public bodies, digital safety experts, and civil society groups, frontline workers, refugee and minority communities, and the influencers and communicators shaping public opinion. So this summit would allow Wales to build a strategy for countering far-right narratives, which will increase before the Senate election in May 2026. And summit would allow Wales to also create a clear, fast reporting mechanism and establish a cross-sector rapid response network, train council, schools and frontline staff, share real evidence of how misinformation impacts communities, protect vulnerable groups from becoming political targets. A summit would send a clear message: Wales will not let lies divide us, and Wales will not let vulnerable communities stand alone, like it happened in Caerphilly very recently during the election. Also, the other proposal from me was that what we saw in Caerphilly, it was not unique. Far-right movements and far-right parties, they rising globally. And disinformation campaigns, they cross borders, and tactics used in one country or in one county very quickly to appear in another. So we need an international roundtable, bringing Wales into conversation. We could do that on the UK level as well, with countries that have already experienced resisting these tactics. So countries like Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Ireland, New Zealand, Canada, and others tackling extremism online, what we could learn what works, what doesn't, how they protect minorities, how they respond rapidly to false narratives, how they build public resilience. I think this is very crucial and very important. It's quite inspiring that many political parties also recognizing this disinformation is not just disinformation, but also a safeguarding issue, especially with 25% of rise of hate crimes within the UK in general, and a lot more mental health appointments and all of these things that shows how much impact it has on communities. And also many refugees and asylum seekers from different backgrounds shared their stories and personal stories about the impact, how this far-right narratives affecting them personally, how it affects their families or their children at school. The other discussion we recently had is also how these far-right narratives are trying to shape the education on educational level. So, for example, in Wales, we have many schools who, they teach different religions and there are a variety of different food, but many parents now standing against children learning about different cultures because of foreign narratives, the way they misrepresent curriculum, and it's going beyond just impact on the displaced communities, but also impact on many different levels. And so the impacts of Caerphilly were real. Going back to this. So displaced families, they felt targeted and unwelcome. Some were afraid to leave their homes. Local relationships were strained. Volunteers reported burnout from trying to counter misinformation alone. Trust in institutions weakened. Far-right groups gained confidence. This is why we must treat disinformation as more than politics. As I said, it is a safeguarding issue. It affects mental health, community cohesion, and public trust. It creates real dangers for real people. And that's why I'm saying that what we need now, we need to protect both communities and democracy. Wales needs, and the UK needs also a unified reporting system so disinformation reports go to one place, not three. And literally what happened in Caerphilly, they just pointed us to each other. So there is no responsible body for this kind of disinformation that targets displaced communities. So also we need more stable immigration pathways. So displaced families cannot be used as political weapons. Stronger regulations on political materials, public information campaigns, so facts reach people before misinformation does. So as I said about summit and about international exchange on countering far-right narratives. So we learn from other countries already fighting this battle successfully, or some aspects of it. Ukrainians came to Wales believing that this place where truth matters, this place was where the truth matters, where communities looked after each other, where democracy was protected. What happened in Caerphilly must not become a new normal, and it must become the moment Wales decided to act and the UK decided to act. Because with political will, with cooperation, and with clear strategy, we could build society where misinformation cannot thrive and where vulnerable communities are never left to fight hate alone. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, we've had some magnificent panelists, and I think at this juncture it's appropriate for Elise Benjamin for the Green Party to try and pull this all together from the party perspective in terms of what agents like local councillors and policymakers are doing to put forward a robust counter to what is being put forward by government and what is being put forward by the media that is pandering to these right-wing narratives that undermine efforts to earn an honest living, unmolested, and to rent and have future for your kids here, unmolested. Elise, are you happy to speak?
Yep. I should just warn you that my Wi-Fi, which is supposed to be super fast, is being a bit funny tonight. So if I suddenly stop, I can start. I should jump back in very quickly. So the Green Party response to Russia's war in Ukraine has been very clear right from the start. The party was quick to set up a Ukraine policy WhatsApp group comprising of leaders, relevant spokespeople, media staff, and appropriate executive members, national executive members. As international coordinator at the time, I was a member of this group. The group was established to deal with any day-to-day issues that may need a party response, and was very helpful in guiding party spokespeople on how to respond to Russia's war. Looking back at party social media, the first Green Party post in early March 2022 clearly condemned the turning away of Ukrainian refugees at Calais. A key message being that whilst there were warm words from the government in support of Ukraine, this hadn't prevented 150 Ukrainian refugees from being turned away at Calais. The party then went on to demand that the government open safe routes for Ukrainian refugees. When The Guardian covered the scandal of hundreds of Ukrainian refugees who were left homeless in England, the Green Party was quick to condemn it as incompetent, heartless, and unacceptable. And those are direct quotes. The Green Party also highlighted the appalling situation for Ukrainian refugees in Moldova, demanding that the government provide safe and legal routes to asylum. And Caroline Lucas used her large social media platform to condemn the slow, incompetent, and downright deceitful, her words, response to the Ukrainian refugee crisis. Unlike the current and previous governments, the Green Party understands that the reasons for migration are complex, and that often, as in the case of Ukraine, those fleeing are doing so reluctantly. All of the party responses I've cited fit in with the Green Party's long-held position of standing up for refugees. And the party has the most progressive refugee and asylum policies of any UK political party, taking a holistic approach that links migration to foreign policy and international affairs, acknowledging that many who migrate do so for their own welfare. The Green Party has a specific migration policy which complements the party's refugee and asylum policy. And the policy states, quotes, "The current hostile environment is designed to ensure migrants are discouraged from staying in the UK. After years of repeated applications and large fees, many who do finally reach settled or citizenship status will have developed an understandable distrust and dislike of the Home Office. Instead, we propose a fair and humane alternative which treats all new migrants as potential citizens and ensures that they feel at home here," unquote. The policy details how migrants who are not refugees or asylum seekers are to be treated, and elements of this policy, some of those elements are relevant to Ukraine refugees, specifically treating all migrants as if they are citizens with voting rights, helping families to be together, abolishing the no recourse to public funds condition, abolishing the settlement route that leaves immigrants in limbo for years, and stopping the imprisonment of people because of their immigration status. So those are core elements of that migration policy, but there are others. So now, of course, we have these new government proposals. Just when you thought government response to migration couldn't get any worse, along comes a Labour government that has become reform light. These latest government proposals are the polar opposite of how Greens would respond to refugees and other migrants. And the Green Party response has been one of clear condemnation. To quote Carla Denyer, MP, just after these latest government proposals were announced, "This is a new low for this government, plumbing the depths of performative cruelty in hopes that the public won't notice they have no answers to the real issues facing communities across this country." In that quote, Carla was highlighting how these latest government policies are in effect using migrants as a cover for failed domestic policies. The new policies would see asylum seekers having to wait 20 years to apply to settle permanently and be subject to regular reviews every 2.5 years, meaning people could be returned to their home nation if it is deemed safe. My fear for Ukrainians who have fled Russia's war is that as soon as some sort of peace deal is signed, they will be forced to return prematurely before there is a genuine guarantee that they will be safe. It's not as if Putin hasn't made it clear, absolutely clear, that he wants to recreate Greater Russia, something I'm acutely aware of from conversations with Greens in those countries that are directly threatened by Putin's expansionist aspirations, and that includes Ukrainian Greens. To again quote Carla Denyer, MP, she says, "Trapping refugees in perpetual limbo where even those who have been granted asylum would have the constant threat of deportation hanging over their heads, undermining integration and making it impossible to put down roots. These are extreme, inhumane proposals from a desperate and failing government." Personally, I fear for the welfare of refugees in this country. A few days ago, I had a conversation with a former colleague. We were both Green councillors together in Oxford. He and his wife had 3 generations of a Ukrainian family living with them for several years. The grandmother now has accommodation but has struggled to learn English and is quite isolated. She has a dilemma because she wants to be able to return to Ukraine but doesn't want to leave her daughter and granddaughter behind, highlighting how complicated life can be for refugees who've been in the UK for several years. Because of her lack of English, she is unaware of the fact that the family might be forced to leave the UK. Her daughter and granddaughter recently moved to a council house and the granddaughter is settled in primary school. So the daughter is worried that the disruption of being forced to move back to Ukraine. This again illustrates how complicated immigration can be and how wrong the government is to oversimplify why people migrate. We need a government that is honest with the public about the complexities of immigration, not one that panders to right-wing scaremongering. And I can't help but reflect on my own family, who were all refugees from Eastern Europe, mostly in the late 19th century. My grandfather moving from Odessa in 1910 as a 5-year-old child, they would most likely be living in temporary accommodation, prevented from working, and with the threat of deportation hanging over them if they had been refugees today. And that, just a little photo, that is my grandfather when he was about 19. And we do have photos from Odessa, which I treasure. Speaking personally, I very much hope that those Ukrainian refugees who want to return are able to do so quickly and safely. But I also hope that those who want to stay are able to do so without fear of government discrimination. And I can't end without acknowledging that migration is such an important issue for the Green Party that we have a dedicated spokesperson for refugees. This spokesperson role is currently held by Councillor Hannah Spencer, who is also the leader of the Greens on Trafford Council. Sadly, Hannah is unable to be with us tonight as she has a council meeting. And I also can't end without just mentioning that thanks to my grandfather, I have so far passed through 2 stages of the application process for Ukraine citizenship. It's my stake in solidarity with Ukrainians. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Elise. That is really helpful. I am going to, for reasons of time, rather than go through every single panelist, asking them an individual question, I will actually ask cross-cutting questions to you all. So that will allow the audience who've kindly attended to also make their own contributions. And could I remind the audience, please could you keep your contributions or questions to 2 minutes for the sake of fairness to the panelists to respond, and also to other people who may have contributions or questions to make. So cross-cutting question for all 5 panelists, but the researchers and Ukrainians in particular, because it's not really a Green Party monopoly conversation. What immediate steps should host institutions and local councils take to improve access to work, education and mental health support? Because research shows gaps in access, community leaders see the consequences daily. What 3 concrete short-term measures would make the biggest difference for families and young people?
Should I go first, as I spoke
Please
first?
do,
That makes
yes.
sense. Well, I mean, I think it depends what you mean by host institutions. If you mean the government, then the best thing they can do is offer a clear pathway to settlement, because that would resolve an awful lot of the issues that displaced Ukrainians are facing in terms of access to employment, housing, education, long-term opportunities. And we as a team are also of the opinion that this would be one way in which many displaced Ukrainians would be able to best support the recovery of Ukraine when the war ends, through diaspora engagement and remittances and transfer of skills and qualifications and networks and businesses and entrepreneurship, and those things that they'll be able to do if their future here is secure.
Natalie Corgood.
Well, I can mainly say almost the same, because councils really can't help, and the only thing that Ukrainians need is really path to settlement, settled status, because we're losing jobs, losing tenancies. I almost lost my tenancy just because, my visa status was about to end, and my daughter can't, enter college, and then many, many other things. People can't get to university just because of short-term status. That's that. Only this can help settlement. Thank you.
Natalia Zinets, would you like to come in on this?
I mean, I'm supporting what Sarah and Natalia was saying.
Okay. Yulia.
I would just want to add, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. I just would want to add, in terms of housing, the way it works at the moment, each local authority makes decisions on how they spend the budget. So there is no one single system that works equally in all local authorities. So the way they spend the budget is completely dependent from their team leader or just few people in each council. So, for example, in Wales, each local authority decides how much they want to support with like deposit or some things, which as Welsh Refugee Council, we already proposed to the Senate to make this system equal, to make it the same for every local authority. But yeah, this is one of the barriers, because some local authorities, they do provide lots of support with housing, and some local authorities, they completely, they don't do that much in this area.
Thank you, Yulia.
So there is a kind of inequality. It really depends on where people are located at the moment.
Thank you. Elise, would you like to reprise before I open the questions to the floor? Elise? You're on mute, Elise.
Sorry, my Wi-Fi dropped out briefly there.
Oh, that's fine.
I mean, for me, I think I'm not an expert I'm expert enough to answer this, but I do know that from a Green Party perspective, I think that the most important thing is that we need to be working through the Association of Green Councillors to provide briefing for our councillors, which can also go to our parliamentarians on exactly what actions they can take within the bodies they're elected to.
Thank you so much. Right, in that case, I'm going to open this to the floor. And I notice that Mateusz would like to make a contribution, a proposal, if you like. Mateusz, are you happy to speak?
Hey, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, so sorry, my name is Matt. I'm actually not involved too much with Ukraine Solidarity campaign. I was behind this petition, which was calling for settlement scheme. The petition collected 35,000 signatures, so that's one thing. We definitely need to push the conversation about settlement, and I think we're just simply putting bit and bobs here and there. So there are petitions that are collecting 1,000, 2,000, 20,000. We never get 100,000, and we definitely need to push for people to get in touch with MPs to ask for this issue. Regarding potential settlement, which will be later for Ukrainians, as I said, there is a many reason it will bite your lower back. For the meaning, for example, like accessing to public funds. So you potentially people from this community will be punished for 20 years waiting list. So definitely, I'm not Ukrainian myself, I'm from Eastern Europe, but definitely we need to join the fight to resist this proposal. And the third thing is from the housing perspective. So I've stopped volunteering because for many reasons with the homelessness charities previously in Islington. Now I live in Cambridge. So if someone lives in Cambridge, welcome. So I see increasing number of people waiting for homeless in emergency accommodation. And I think Red Cross just last year published that's double the number of average Brits waiting. Ukrainians are twice more possibly affected by homelessness. And that's the perspective which is not discussed, how it will affect, because once you hit the homelessness, you have to affect public funds. So whatever will happen, just simply the community is screwed. So we need to face the list the points which will affect, and I'm happy to help it from this perspective, and just show that any proposal, whatever it will be, is unreasonable. And first of all, the improvements need to go to make full status towards the settlement. Sorry, I'm talking out of sleeve, but that's I wanted to phrase.
Well, thank you very much for that contribution, Matthews. I think we have time for another question. We're doing very well for time. Does anyone want to raise a hand? I see no raised hands here at the moment. Alternatively, I do have questions up my sleeve for the panel. Okay.
Sorry, I think Jack Boyle's got his hand up, but I did just want to point, following Mateusz's contribution, that in terms of a unified voice, firstly, we launched this report in Parliament on the 17th of November to a full room of 90 people, including several MPs, with the support of Martin Wrigley, who is leading on the APPG Ukraine. And we also launched the organisation that I've just put in the chat, which is Ukrainian Voice UK, which is an endeavour not to kind of homogenise, but to bring together Ukrainian solidarity, particularly around those who've arrived since 2022, and to unite those diverse voices. So if people are interested in being involved in that, then do get in touch with me, and I'll put you on to the person leading it.
Thank you very much. Do we have one other hand up at the moment?
Yep, me.
Thank you, Jack. Please do.
Sure. So my question is for Elise. So with regards to combating the narratives, the right-wing narratives regarding Ukraine, what could members who are on the ground, so people like doing canvassing or doing phone banking, that kind of thing, what could they do to best, I guess, combat the narratives that might be in what could people do to change the mind of people who might be somewhat convinced by these right-wing narratives about Ukraine?
Elise,
you're on
are you
mute.
still with us?
Yeah, no, sorry. Can you repeat it? My internet crashed again. I don't
Sure,
know
that's
what's
fine.
on today, but don't get Virgin Media, basically.
Yeah, and I've got bad experience with that too. So on the ground, for people who are in the Green Party, let's say they're doing phone banking or they're doing canvassing, if they come across someone who's maybe somewhat convinced by the false narratives pushed by the right regarding the Ukrainian war, what could someone who is doing this canvassing or phone banking do to best combat these narratives and perhaps change these people's minds?
Fundamentally, I would, if you think it's going to come up, and I actually haven't heard of anyone have it come up on the doorstep in a negative way, it's important to arm yourself with a few clear bullet points, because the shorter the message, the easier it is to counter. It's interesting that you say from the right, because to me, the issue is from the left. Those on the left that think that Putin is a good man because he must be anti-capitalist. The West-splainers is the term I've heard. And that's a more difficult one to argue. I think from a fundamental perspective, it's about, I think there is an issue about treating people as human beings, as equal human beings. I think that's something that is a really crucial thing to promote. And I suppose from a trying not to deflect from a Green Party perspective, I think using it as an opportunity to segue into talking about why our asylum and immigration policy is so much better, and those core points that I mentioned, which is that no other party that I'm aware of has policies that aren't in silos. We don't believe in policies in silos. We believe in joining policies up. So I've always articulated with people about how any immigration policy has to be linked to defence policy, foreign policy, and so on, and economic policy, actually. And I hope that's helpful. I don't really know enough more about how to tackle it on the doorstep. And it's a few years since I last canvassed, I should say as well.
Yeah, that's fine. That's been quite helpful, really. So thank you.
If that's okay, I would like to add a few things or thoughts on this. Yeah. Okay. I think it's very important because what happened in Caerphilly recently, from the experience I see, what political parties do, they go into defensive mode when they hear this kind of narratives and questions like they take in our jobs, they take in our houses, all of these things. I think before the election, before it even happens, I think parties need to promote actually real information about how much Ukrainians contribute to society, to community, that they're not the reason for housing issues or other issues as well. So as well, if it happens during the canvassing, I think it's very important for a person to respond to misinformation. So it's very important to equip party with all narratives and all responses to each narrative. For example, if Ukrainians taking our resources and public services, so the response could be that how much contribution Ukrainians make, all of these things. So I think people who do canvassing, it's very important for them to be prepared and equipped with every counter narrative, every counter argument for each narrative beforehand. This is like really important. This is what happened in Caerphilly by-election, and this is what I tried to do. I literally tried to write kind of guidance for each party with all the counter arguments for each point. Yeah.
Do we have another hand up? Could anyone point to anyone else? Because if not, I do have other questions from the chair.
Sasha.
Sasha, yes. Please do join us, Sasha.
Hi, thanks very much. It's just a note on the point Elise raised about arguments on the left, which I think I, funnily enough, posted similar in the chat just as she started speaking. I don't I don't think the argument is so much. I don't think the biggest threat is so much from people on the left who think the Russian regime is good. I think there is some of that on the right, the kind of extreme right. I don't think you get that many people. There are sort of some cranks, but I think what's much more widespread on the left is not really people who say yes, the Russian regime is bad, but they explain everything through the lens of it relates to the West-splaining point you made, Louise. They explain everything through the lens of Western imperialism. So it's what I would call campism, and I think that is widespread. So it. Not just like a legitimate critique of Western imperialist powers and what they do, but everything everywhere in the world, regardless of what's actually happening, is about Western imperialism. And so therefore Russia, even, yes, we don't like, and in some cases genuinely don't like the Russian regime, but it's off the hook for its imperialism in Ukraine because ipso facto, it must be the fault of the West and therefore also of Ukraine. So I think and I think with the kind of if the your party group takes off, I think that could become more of an issue for us. And so I actually think in terms of, sorry, I know this is off topic, but in terms of the organisers of this meeting, I think firming up and further activating rank and file Green Party support for Ukraine is going to be quite important in challenging those arguments on the left.
Can I just jump in because Sarah has made a comment in the chat, a useful comment about needing to think about story sharing and meeting people where they are. And this talk of door knocking has reminded me that on the occasions around immigration issues where I have had someone on the doorstep who has been sucked in by the language of Farage and his mates, I sometimes, and it's kind of learning to read the room, I sometimes take a punt that they read a newspaper like the Daily Mail, and the Daily Mail peddles dissatisfaction. And so one of my most effective responses is to say, well, it must be really bad where they come from if they want to come here. And it actually works. But you do have to be careful who you say it to. So it is about learning to read people.
I just want to jump in as well. When we speak about Russia and Ukraine and people say some misinformation stuff, it's very easy for me to counter that when I normally just say, well, Ukraine didn't cross any borders, Russia did. So yeah, it always helps in terms of understanding of who aggressor is.
I think Elizabeth has her hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Liz Lawrence, I'm one of the organisers of UCU Members for Ukraine. And I was wondering about some of the contributions, whether we should be thinking about motions on these sort of topics for union conferences coming up next year, particularly around, the right of all refugees to have easy, quick routes to right to permanent residency. And in that, we could obviously point out how Ukrainians are being treated by not having such rights. The other thing I wanted to pick up, which I'm a bit concerned about, is the way we get trapped into this discourse about refugees and migrants having to prove how worthy they all are, what contributions they all make all the time. I was at a union meeting where a friend who's been resident in this country for decades, but she comes from Germany, was saying, well, why do we have to keep proving our worthiness? Because people who are born here don't have to prove we're worthy to be here. And, the way the government's using it, it has some worrying sides, because there may be some refugees who are totally traumatized and actually aren't in a position to do a lot other than perhaps look after themselves or cope with basic life because of things that have happened to them. We shouldn't be saying they've got to prove they're worthy by doing a load of volunteer work or getting a much needed job in some area where we've got a labour shortage or something like this, because sometimes people may not be in a position to do so. And it seems to me it's part of the hostile climate, really, the way the Labour government's been going on about how they've got to keep proving how worthy they are and how they make a contribution. What we should be focusing on is the notion of refugees having rights under international conventions and, the human need. Just wanted to put that into discussion, because what I appreciate is absolutely true to say a lot of refugees and migrants make fantastic contributions to this country. We shouldn't get tied into a discourse which says they've got to do so to have a right to stay here. So I just want to put that into the discussion.
Right. One more hand up, or I have a question. No, well, in that case, I do have a question I'd like to put to the panelists. We're at 20 minutes past the hour. We have a good 10 minutes or so before we have to wrap up. But if people do want to stay on the call, well, I'm sure we could overrun a little. It depends on your availability. But my deeper dive topic is what role do employers play in supporting displaced Ukrainians, and where are they falling short? That is to say, where are employers falling short? I think Vitaly Zinis addressed this, and I also think Natalia Kogut did as well. But could I put this back to the panel? Sarah, would you like to lead on this?
Yes, I can do. So, I mean, what our research shows is, as I said, this widespread downskilling, which is in part to do with English language skills, needing, as Natalia Zinat said, about, to get a job now, and therefore to take a job perhaps that's not a perfect fit. But what we know from previous research is that kind of downskilling, so which means working below your skill level, is more common amongst migrants from Eastern Europe than it is from migrants from Western Europe. And there's some interesting research around how post-Cold War, the West created Europe's East as a kind of pool of cheap labour. And we see that through the migration flows, particularly since 2004. And then there's the stereotypes that result from that creation of that pool of cheap labour that then perpetuate and so on, which is all to say that many of us have unchecked biases, and that would include employers. So I guess one thing that employers can do, there is, of course, not much they can do about literal recognition of qualifications. That's more at the level of professional organisations or government to make those changes. But just when they're receiving applications from people who don't have their education and qualifications in the UK to maybe try and check their biases and make sure they're actually looking at people on an equal playing field. That would be one thing.
Thank you. Natalie Cockett, would you like to come back on this at all?
Yeah, I think that generally Ukrainians are managing, even without sometimes recognition of qualifications, just medical professionals are really suffering with that. That's something that needs to be, and it would be very helpful for NHS as well. We have quite a lot of good medical professionals and was quite good medical system in Ukraine prior to invasion, of course, of Russia. I don't know how now, but really, employers, we can't really blame them for not wanting to, for example, employ Ukrainians, because logically that they want to employ somebody with permanent status to invest, in training and the rest. So this is, again, we clash with the same problem with the status, really. And all those right to work checks when you're applying, any Ukrainian, all Ukrainians have to apply like 28 days before the visa expire. You can't apply before. It's like skilled worker visa 3 months, and for Ukrainians just 28 days, as for any other, as for dependents, basically. And then, you're getting from your employer like emails every day that, oh, your visa is about to expire, what are you doing? And it's really, really frustrating and pressuring. Thank you.
Thank you. Natalie Zenitz, would you like to say anything at all? It's not compulsory, but please do if you want. No? Okay.
I guess the
Julia?
summary, reflecting what I'm hearing from my friends as well. Yeah, I've myself haven't experienced any discrimination when I was applying for my role in terms of my visa or where I came from, just judged by my experience and skills. So, but I guess, more Ukrainians are facing those issues which were mentioned by Natalia, and in highly competitive environment, it's difficult, right, to get the proper job for which you're actually qualified back in Ukraine.
Thank you. Julia, would you like to come back in on this?
Yeah, sure. I always have something to say. About displaced professionals. That's actually something I also proposed to the Welsh government in terms of nation of sanctuary. So, for example, in Wales, there are far-right narratives against the nation of sanctuary that it brings more people here, when in fact it helps people to integrate, which also learn English and find jobs. But my proposal is to make this a program, the scheme is actually more focused on helping people finding jobs, helping people to get into NHS. There is only one program in Wales that exists now, which helps people to retrain and start working in NHS, but bureaucratically and structurally it's extremely slow, and it happens quite rare, and it's also very underfunded. So just today I spoke with two of my friends. One of them is a nurse and one of them is dentist. They literally spoke, they don't know how they can use their skills here, how they can. It's actually a very big problem. That's the lack of bridging programs to help people meet UK standards, and the lack of this retraining programs as well, where people can just instead of because it's for the UK and for Wales, it's much cheaper to retrain professionals already skilled and experienced than just to train people from scratch. That's why it's we could position it strategically as economically valuable programs, and that's something I think that would be really useful for the UK and Wales in general.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm aware that Sasha Ismail has an announcement to make. Sasha, about the AGM on Saturday the 6th in London.
Yes. So would it be possible if I handed over to Chris Ford for this, in fact?
Absolutely, that'd be great.
Chris,
Chris is our
with you?
secretary. Christopher.
Sorry. I was not prepared.
Sorry, that's my
No problem. It's okay. Hi. I'm Chris Ford, and I'm Secretary of the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. On a Saturday, we have our National AGM conference, and anyone who's a member of the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign is very welcome to attend for the whole of the conference. On the afternoon, we have a panel, a forum which we're holding, which I'd very much like to invite everyone here to attend. And it's entitled Russia's War in Ukraine, Resisting Authoritarianism and the Rebirth of Fascism. I've put it in the chat. Speakers include Yulia Bond, who's here today, John McDonnell, the Labour MP, Yulia Yurchenko, a political economist and also a representative of the KVPU, Confederation of Free Trade Unions of Ukraine. Mick Antoniev, who's a Labour member of the Welsh Parliament, also of Ukrainian heritage, who's from our campaign. The chair is Natalie Kopitko, who's at this meeting today, a member of the Green Party. And also Zofia Malish, who's from the Polish party Razem, from the International Office and is at the European Parliament. So this will take place at 2 o'clock. It's at the GMB Trade Union Head Office. Everyone is welcome who wants to come along, if you can. The event will be followed by a performance of the Hromada Collective, which is a choir, a fantastic group of young Ukrainians, and they'll be after our meeting. So other point I want to make, which is very, very important, all of you know that there is currently discussions taking place between Trump, Putin, and a number of other stooges who we could describe in less polite terms. And there's meetings taking place all this week. By the end of this week, we may know more clearly the good or bad news of the outcome of this process. Chances are it may be bad news, looking at the 28-point plan that's already presented as a foundation. So this will be an opportunity to discuss this process. As a campaign, we have been raising and we've held demonstrations and calling against any betrayal of Ukraine. And we've been making a very clear point that as far as we're concerned, occupation is not peace. And whilst Ukraine is occupied, that is not a sustainable long-term peace. And while thousands of children are being kidnapped and are being subject to industrial abuse in the occupied territories, that's not a basis for peace. So these are points that we'll have an opportunity to discuss also at this forum. So I want this chance just to invite everyone. And if you can't come, please do keep an eye on the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign. In terms of what's going to happen this week, we will be responding. We do plan to organise protests if Ukraine is betrayed by Trump and Putin with this, and we're certainly calling on Europe to take a more independent, assertive position to support Ukraine and not go along with any betrayal by Trump or Putin. Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I think we've reached the half hour, and I think it is time to wrap up. Before we close, I want to thank our panelists, Sarah, Natalie Kogut, Natalia Zinets, Yulia Bond, and Elise Benjamin, once again, for their time, insight, and commitment. And thank all of you for being part of this conversation. A special thanks as well to the other organisers who made tonight possible. If you'd like to stay connected, please do keep an eye on follow-up materials and upcoming events and continue the conversations you started here. Solidarity is not built just in meetings like this, but in the actions and networks that grow afterwards. So thank you all for joining this call, and have a pleasant Tuesday evening and a good rest of the week. Thank you.